Welcome to Act 3 of this three-part mini-series, where we have been getting into the truths you haven't been told about trust. This final act will see us delve into the impact of all of the information that we have explored already in the previous acts, so without giving too much away, let the show roll on. Firstly, how does all of this information impact contracts? Well, contracts, they are legally binding agreements between two or more parties, right? Which creates enforceable rights and obligations between these two parties. For a contract to be actually valid and enforceable in the eyes of the law, there are a few requirements that are needed. These are offer and also possibly counter-offer. Then you need acceptance, which means there needs to be a meeting of the minds. There needs to be full disclosure from all sides. There needs to be consideration, so value provided from the contracting parties. This does mean that there needs to be a risk where both parties are exchanging value, which actually makes them open to risk if the other side doesn't perform on their side of the bargain. Then there is intention to create legally enforceable rights and obligations. Then you need to have parties that actually have capacity to enter into contracts, so being of legal age and competent. And lastly, you need evidence of consent through the signatures of the parties or through the conduct of the parties themselves. So hopefully you'll be able to see that actually contracts would usually fail for the consideration element if they include currency, or what we commonly refer to as money, as the accepted payment method, because we know this is all based in debt and no true tangible asset has been exchanged. The thing is, currency, such as the banknotes that we all use widely and accept widely, they were given what is called legal tender status, which essentially means that no one can sue you for supposed non-payment if you use that currency. Because remember, it's not payment in fact, right? Which the use of the currency is all based in debt, as we have previously discussed. As it's not payment in fact, you can see that by law, liabilities or evidences of debt have become sufficient to discharge other debts. Again, remember though, these are liabilities and evidences of debt who someone else has made a promise on, which means that they are the ones with the ultimate liability to pay. The question then arises, at which point will the liability be accepted and then acted upon by the one who made the promise? At what point will these promises be acted upon and actually fulfilled? Because as it stands, they're all unfulfilled promises. Hence why the country's national debt is increasing at a rate that none of us can properly understand. At which point is someone going to accept the responsibility and do what they promised to do in line with the maxim pacta sunt servanda, which means that promises must be kept? Over time, it will become clearer and clearer to you that if a contract involves payment in the form of money or the national currency of your country, then you need to recognize that this is a contract being formed with the individual monetary trust that you have with the UK government, the individual account as such. The UK government is organized as a trust structure, and that's how they operate. And the Treasury Department are directly tasked with the management of the finances, having the Royal Mint and the Bank of England as the issuers of the legal currency. It is an important side note here as well that even the electronic money that you have, so the numbers in your bank account, well, those numbers, they represent the currency. So even those numbers, they just represent the legal tender coins and notes, right? However, we do need to think for a second. Hold on, who actually uses these tools? Oh wait, it's me. It's you watching this video. It's your neighbor. It's your most beloved. It's your future generations. Physical you, the you that exists in the 3D world, you are the beneficiary of these tools because you get to use them. That is what a beneficiary does. They use and enjoy property. I mean, How else do you get the food you need to survive? How else do you get the medicine you need to heal if you are sick? How else do you get a form of transport so you are able to exercise your right to travel in this world? Physical you is the beneficiary to this relationship. However, there is a point here that I need to make you aware of. And this point is that physical you cannot interact directly with or within the individual trust relationship. This is why we are all given the gift of a legal personality. All contracts that you engage in are in reality contracts with your legal personality, which is also termed legal person, natural person, legal fiction, legal identity, all sorts really. You can call it whatever you like, and there are so many different terms used out there. But essentially, it is fact that you have been gifted a legal personality, which you can choose to use as you interact with the legal world. And this legal personality is what you need to be able to own property legally in a way that the law and the legal system will actually recognize and will accept without question. So you can see that you have been given a legal personality for your benefit. Oh, well, guess what? That makes you a beneficiary again. For you to be able to interact with the commercial world, to actually get into contracts, to be able to enjoy your trust relationship with the government, all of it, you need the legal personality. But the key here is that you are not your legal personality. You are either a living woman, a living man, or the offspring of a living man and woman. You had to exist first before your legal personality could have been created and then gifted to you. This distinction is extremely, extremely important. Now we move on to the impact that this information has on the debtor-creditor relationship. So the legal definition of debtor is someone who owes an obligation to another, especially an obligation to pay money. Then, on the flip side, you have the legal definition of creditor, which is one to whom a debt is owed, one who gives credit for money or goods. So as you know by now, it is actually impossible for you to pay, as it is not your liability to. You are not the trustee in the monetary system trust that the government created by operation of law the moment they signed off on the abandonment of the gold standard. If you do not have the liability and therefore you do not have an obligation to pay, then simply put, you cannot be a debtor because you do not fit the definition of one. On the other hand, however, you are a beneficiary to the monetary trust, and so you are entitled to the benefits of this trust relationship, which also makes you a creditor, right? You are owed something. You are the one to whom a debt obligation is owed to. There's an important note here that really sets things apart, and that is that the trustee-beneficiary relationship prevails over a debtor-creditor relationship. This is literally what the Senior Courts Act of 1981, Section 49, is all about. This information is extremely impactful because it applies to loans, mortgages, credit card applications, even student loans, situations where you sign a contract which states that you will promise to pay something. Well, that contract is actually considered by law a promissory note. Or when you make an application for something where you promise you will pay a loan back, usually with interest as well, right? Well, what you maybe didn't realize is that you made a promise which is considered the value in itself by law. Whether you actually fulfill that promise or not, I mean, we've discussed earlier that the Bank of England do it, so why can't you? You may think, but the bank or the credit provider that you made an agreement with, well, they gave you something, right? So what did they actually give you? Well, they gave you nothing. At least nothing that was theirs. They took no risk, nor are they going to lose out on anything if you do not perform on the promise. What happened was they gave you the value of your own promissory note converted into the national currency of your country. So this might sound crazy, but your promissory note is the value. I mean, this is the point of the abandonment of the gold standard in 1931, right? Since then, promises are value, regardless of whether or not those promises are actually backed by anything. They could be backed by another promise if you wanted to. Your promise was so valuable, in fact, that it was actually accepted as tender from you. Your promise is like your own individual currency, which the bank or the credit provider accepted, and then they credited your account with numbers, or they opened a line of credit for you, right? Which will simply just reflect the value of your promise, and therefore the overall value of the promissory note that you created with your consent and signature. But there's a key aspect here that I really want you to grasp. Just because your account is credited with numbers, this does not mean that the bank or the credit provider gave you something of theirs. They did not make any loss from their own property. You deposited something of value. They then credited your account. This is exactly how it works with Bank of England notes. If you have a £50 note and you take it to your bank and deposit it there, they will credit your account with £50. Why? Because you just handed over something of value to them, which they are obligated to credit into your account. Now remember, the £50 note is just a promissory note. So how is this any different to a promissory note that you create yourself, known as a loan agreement or a mortgage agreement or a credit card application? Just because it's called loan agreement, mortgage agreement, credit card application does not make it anything other than a promissory note. There is no difference at all. You handed over something of value. They are obligated to credit your account, hence why they do. When you deposit something of value to the bank, where they then credit your account, does this make them a creditor? No is the answer. Just because an account is credited does not mean that the one who credited that account is a creditor. Let's look at this really simply. Imagine you go to a bank to open an account with them. To do this, you will usually be asked to provide some sort of government-issued identity document. Remember, this is a document that the government issued, so it is their creation, and you are a beneficiary of that document because you get to use it. You then hand this ID to the bank, and the bank will look at it to check it's real and valid, with this physical handing over action being legal tender in itself. How? Well, it is a government document that you have provided to prove your legal identity or legal personality wherever you go and to whoever asks for it, right? And they have to accept it because they actually trust that the government issued document is accurate and truthful because the government issued it, right? So once the checks are complete, they will happily open an account in the name of the identity they were provided. But what actually happened here? Well, you deposited something valuable to the bank. Otherwise, why would they open an account, right? All accounts are opened because there is something of value given, which is then represented by the opening and just the mere existence of that account. Accounts are not opened just for the sake of it. There has to be something of value given, or the promise of value, or even just a whiff that something of value could ever be made from that account. Think about it. If you start a free trial for something, for example, an entertainment subscription service, you will have to make an account, right? Why do companies make you do this? Well, it's because they're betting on you liking their product and actually signing up to their subscription, which means there is value and revenue in it for them. So that's why the account was opened in the first place, right? So that you could get a free trial so that you could hopefully sign on to their subscription. Back to the bank account. Now, with an account open, you can deposit or withdraw your national currency. But did you know that in banking law terms, you have actually made a loan to the bank? When you deposit money into your bank account, you actually give the bank that money. It becomes their property, and you are just considered an unsecured creditor in the at-law side of the law. Whenever you want to withdraw that money, what you actually are doing is making a demand on the loan that you made to the bank, and the bank then has an obligation to give you your money back. The reality that most people do not know is that when you open a bank account and you use it, the money in that account becomes property of the bank, where they can actually use it for investments, they can trade with it, they can do anything they wish to really, because it's their property now. Their only objective and obligation really is to have enough money available to give back to you if you do come and make a demand for your money, considering that you are the creditor, right? If the bank makes really bad investments and loses money, then your money is no longer guaranteed to be given back to you, because you are always considered an unsecured creditor, which means you have no real claim to any of the bank's assets. This definition of an unsecured creditor helps bring some more clarity. So it is defined as an individual or institution that lends money without obtaining specified assets as collateral. This poses a higher risk to the creditor because it will have nothing to fall back on should the borrower default on the loan. If a borrower fails to make a payment on a debt that is unsecured, the creditor cannot take any of the borrower's assets without winning a lawsuit first. So would you look at that? Did you realize that the bank is your borrower? They borrow your funds. They are your debtor and you are the creditor. But this is a risky relationship because if the borrower, the bank, if they default on the loan you gave to them, you actually have nothing to make up for it, unfortunately, unless you can sue them successfully. So naturally, you can see why the debtor-creditor relationship is what the bank wants you to focus on. They want you to remain focused on that relationship because that's where they are the most comfortable in terms of the duties that they owe to you, right? They do not owe you much, minus paying back the loan that they took from you and maybe also a pleasant customer service, if that's even required anymore. However, there is a piece of the puzzle missing here that has been ignored, and that is that the currency itself, the great British pound sterling, is in itself evidence of a trust relationship. The trust relationship that's inherent within the monetary system, which has emerged since the abandonment of the gold standard. This means that all of the high street banks, they are all dealing with funds which are actually subject to an existing trust, right? They are always in direct contact with trust property that has been loaned to them. The bank's top staff, they know this information, and they know that if you knew this information and you could actually express it to them, then the debtor-creditor relationship that they want you to believe you have going on with them goes flying out the window essentially. Why? Because this is secondary to the trustee-beneficiary relationship, and with their direct involvement in this trust property, despite them being a third party to the trust, it means they actually act as a constructive trustee in the equity side of the law, meaning that they would owe you fiduciary duties just like a proper appointed trustee would. And one last note about the note. We mentioned before that works of copyright are considered property. We also mentioned that anything that can be owned is considered property. We mentioned that a trust requires property inside of it as res. We also mentioned that the Bank of England is nationalised, meaning it is property of the government. And we also talked about the fact that the government governs by consent, and they do so by the people, for the people, in a trust structure. Well, isn't it interesting then that the notes themselves say very clearly on the top, Bank of England, and on the bottom in small print they have the copyright sign followed by the governor and company of the Bank of England followed by the year of printing. We can see then that these notes are property of the Bank of England, yet you're the one that can hold them and use them to pay for goods and services. If you had any doubts whatsoever that a trust relationship is at play and is inherent within the monetary system, this is the physical solid proof. The note itself is the property of the bank, and it is even copyright protected. Their copyright, may I add. Yet, it is in your hands, and with it, you get goods and services to sustain your life, the most fundamental and beautiful right that you have on this planet. This property is a tool that you get to use to gain goods and services that you enjoy in some form or another. This is such a clear trust relationship at play because the note is the property which makes up the res of the trust. You are the beneficiary, and the Bank of England, governor, and company are the trustees. So this brings us to the end of this third act, which also brings us to the end of this 3-part mini-series on the truths you haven't been told about trust. We have covered a wide range of topics, which include the summary of trusts and the flexibility involved in them. We've gone over recognizing trust relationships at play. We've discussed the reality of ownership. We've gone through the truth behind the currency and the monetary system. We have analyzed a Bank of England note and broken down each of the key elements on the face of the note. We've shown you how the use of the currency to gain goods and services impacts your ownership rights to property. We've talked about the impact of the monetary system trust on contracts, and we have discussed the impact of the monetary system trust on the debtor-creditor relationship. So I really hope that this 3-part series has provided you with some very inspiring information, which has helped you see things in a clearer way regarding the trusts you are involved in on a daily basis. The importance of learning about trust and equity cannot be denied, especially when we are interacting in trust relationships all the time, and it is virtually impossible for us to avoid them. So I hope that you are able to gain some valuable insights from this 3-part series. And if you did, then let me know by leaving a like, share these videos with someone else, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on more thought-provoking law educational videos that we have in the works. Thank you for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye bye!